Have you ever stopped to consider how much of your life is spent in protest against the very moments you are living? It came to me slowly, over many years of watching people and watching myself. I was sitting in a crowded room once, observing the faces around me. Every single person was engaged in an internal argument. Some were complaining about the weather, others about politics, and many more about themselves. The room was silent, but the noise of these inner complaints was so loud that I could almost hear it. I was young then, and the observation troubled me deeply. I had grown up believing that the world outside was the source of all difficulty, that if only circumstances would change, happiness would follow. But here, in this room, I saw something different. The circumstances were unremarkable, nothing worth contesting, and yet the complaints were everywhere. They were not arising from the world outside. They were arising from somewhere inside, from a place I had never thought to examine. This is how I first encountered the great problem that has occupied me for most of my life. The problem is not that we suffer. Suffering is a natural part of human existence. The problem is what we add to it through constant internal reaction. We pile complaint upon complaint, judgment upon judgment, until the weight of our own resistance becomes heavier than the original difficulty. The stone stays the same size. It is us who keep lifting it with both hands. Let me tell you about a game I once played with a group of my students. It was a simple game, so simple that they laughed when I first proposed it. I asked them to go for 24 hours without a single internal reaction. No complaints, no judgments, no silent curses against the world or against themselves. They looked at me with the familiar expression of those who believe they already understand. A few nodded confidently, convinced that such a task would be nothing more than a mild inconvenience. I watched them walk away, and I knew what would happen. I knew because I had walked that same path myself many years before, carrying the same confidence, the same foolish certainty that I was already master of my inner world. The first student returned within 2 hours, his face red with frustration. He had been cut off in traffic, and before he could stop himself, a torrent of internal fury had erupted. He had not said anything aloud, but the reaction was there, complete and already spent. The second student lasted until lunchtime. She had encountered a colleague who took credit for her work, and the injustice of it had stirred something deep within her. She tried to maintain her composure, but the internal machinery of complaint had already begun its work. By the time she came to see me, she was exhausted from the effort of pretending she was not angry. The third student, a man who prided himself on his spiritual development, made it through the entire day. When he came to report his success, there was a brightness in his eyes that I had not seen before. But when I asked him to describe his day in detail, something interesting emerged. He had been so focused on not complaining that he had actually become more reactive than usual. Every potential complaint had been met with an internal struggle, a wrestling match that consumed his attention completely. These students were not failures. They had discovered what most people spend their entire lives avoiding: the sheer volume of negative reactions that pass through the mind in the course of a single day. The machinery runs constantly, and it runs below awareness. Until you attempt to interrupt it, you cannot know how thoroughly it has been running you. The game of not complaining is not really about complaint. When we protest internally, whether about the weather or our colleagues or our own shortcomings, we are asserting that reality has failed to meet our expectations. This assertion divides us. Part of us holds an idea of how things ought to be, while another part experiences things as they are. The gap between these two is not neutral. It is the specific channel through which unnecessary suffering flows, and we widen it every time we complain. I learned this in a way that might seem strange to modern people. When I was traveling through the mountains of the Caucasus, I stayed with a group of people who had developed a relationship with hardship that I had not encountered before. They did not complain about the cold or the hunger, or the difficulty of the terrain. When I asked them about this, they looked at me with confusion. Why would they complain about reality? Reality was what it was. Complaining about it would be like complaining that water was wet. I had been raised with the assumption that the world should conform to my desires. If it did not, I had the right to feel wronged. These mountain people held a different understanding. That complaint is a form of resistance, and that resistance consumes the very energy one needs to respond effectively to what is actually present. They were not passive. They were, if anything, more capable of action than anyone I had observed, precisely because none of their resources were being spent on argument. One such man lived in a small village where I stayed for several months. He was not wealthy, not educated in any formal sense, and he had suffered more loss than anyone I have ever known. His children had died, his crops had failed, and his health had been broken by years of hard labor. And yet, when I was in his presence, I felt a quality of settledness that had nothing to do with contentment. It was the quality of someone who had made his peace with the full weight of his history and was therefore entirely available to whatever was happening now. I asked him once how he had arrived at this. He laughed and told me about an old woman who had spoken to him when he was young and full of grievance. She told him that every complaint was a prayer to suffering. He resisted the idea for a long time, as one resists an accurate observation. But she was patient in the way people can afford to be patient once they have already learned the thing they are teaching. She did not argue with his resistance. She let it run until it ran out. What the old woman was describing was this: attention is not passive. Whatever we give it to, we feed. His grievances had been growing fat for years while he attended to them, and the attending itself had cost him more than the grievances ever had. When he finally withdrew that attention, not with effort but with a simple and growing disinterest in his own complaints, what remained was something he could not have found while the complaints were filling the space. Take the simple act of waiting in a line. For most people, this is a source of constant internal protest. Every moment of waiting is filled with argument. But consider what this argument costs, not morally, but in terms of what it makes unavailable. The ability to see clearly, to notice what is around you, to be present to the specific, unrepeatable quality of this particular afternoon. A man I once observed in exactly this situation stood in a line that stretched for blocks, his face completely at ease. He was not performing calm. He had simply stopped fighting something he could not change, and in that stopping, found that he was somewhere rather than nowhere. This is the heart of the challenge I offer you. Go 24 hours without an internal reaction. You will notice that your mind will try to find subtle ways to complain that do not look like a complaint. It will complain about your own inability to stop complaining. This is where the real work begins. When you notice you are complaining about the challenge, you have a choice that you did not know you had a moment before. That choice, however small, is the beginning of something. I remember a student who came to me after attempting this. He had failed, but he had failed usefully. Underneath all his reactions, he told me he had found a deep and unexpected fear. He was afraid that if he stopped complaining, he would stop caring. That acceptance was the same as giving up. I recognized this fear. I had carried it myself. It is a false understanding, but it is a persistent one, and simply knowing it is false does not dissolve it. What dissolves it is the experience of acting from stillness rather than from reaction, and finding that the action is more effective and more genuinely engaged with the actual situation than anything the reactive state produced. The man who has stopped arguing with what is in front of him can see it. The man still arguing cannot. The practice I am describing is not complicated. It is to notice. Notice every time you complain internally. Do not judge yourself for it. Do not try to stop it by force. The noticing itself is the work, and it is enough. What you are building is a small but real gap between the stimulus and the response. Most people have no gap there at all. The gap is where freedom lives. I have been practicing this noticing for most of my life, and I am still learning what it reveals. There is no endpoint to this work. Every moment is a new occasion, and some moments are more demanding than others. I crossed a desert once under brutal conditions, in a situation I had brought on myself through a sequence of miscalculations. The sun was without mercy. My water supply was diminished. I was tired in the way that goes past the body, and the complaint arrived, as it always arrives. Why am I doing this? Why did I choose this? Then something else arrived alongside the complaint, the heat on my skin, the specific texture and resistance of the sand beneath each step. The quality of the light, which was doing something remarkable to the horizon that I had been too occupied with my grievance to notice. I was not restored. I was not comfortable, but my relationship to the situation shifted from pure resistance to something that included, alongside the resistance, a presence to where I actually was. The complaint remained in the background, accurate and acknowledged. It simply no longer held the whole picture. This shift, small and undramatic, is what the 24-hour task is designed to reveal. Not through success, because success is unlikely and beside the point. So through the attempt, and what becomes visible when you try and find how thoroughly the machinery has been running without your knowledge or consent. The people I have known who carry this quality of uncontested presence, the ones in whom I have felt something settle when I sat near them, are not people who have had easy lives. The woman who faced death with an acceptance that was not resignation but a kind of clear-eyed forward lean into what was coming. The man building a new existence from the wreckage of the old one, without bitterness, focused entirely on the next thing his hands could do. A dancer I watched once, who was so completely in her body that watching her felt like a reminder of something most of us have forgotten we ever had. These were not people who had found a technique. They had, through the long friction of their own lives, worn away the tendency that insisted on fighting what was actually happening. That wearing away is available to everyone. It does not require extraordinary circumstances, though extraordinary circumstances can accelerate it. It requires only the willingness to look honestly at the quality of your own attention, at where it is actually going, and what it is doing when it gets there. So, I invite you to accept this challenge. I ask you to take this one experiment to see what happens when you stop complaining and start living. Go 24 hours without an internal or external complaint. You will fail. Swallow that failure and sharpen your attention every single day.